The old rules, where getting a job straight out of school or uni, working and paying your taxes and national insurance up until your late 60s, meaning a modest state pension to see you through your retirement, are over, according to one of Britain's top money men. People in their 20s, 30s and 40s today won't be able to rely on drawing a state pension when they're older, despite still being expected to fund today's pensioners through national insurance and income tax. The money you thought you were accruing for retirement has been spent, says Justin Urquhart-Stewart.
Idea was you saved up through the government and it built up a pension pot, and therefore when you actually had a state pension you were drawing down from effectively what you'd already contributed towards. Unfortunately, governments over the years have already taken that money and spent it. So actually what they're having to do is pay pensions out of today's money, not savings to that money. The economic picture for people who are working now, casting forward 20, 30 years ahead, actually most people don't want to look that far ahead because they're frightened about what they may see, and they're quite right to be frightened about it. No one has been able to have the, I suppose, bravery to be able to stand up, or honesty to stand up and say to people, look, be worried, be frightened of this, because this is going to affect us all. You're going to be expecting to work for longer, your returns are going to be lower, and your expectation of being able to then have a happy, solvent retirement, I'm afraid, could just end up being a pipe dream.
Justin says irresponsible governments of all colours have squandered the cash. But there are also structural problems Britain faces, which means its people could face a lifetime of work. For more than 50 years, Britain hasn't produced enough children to replace the people who are dying. We've relied on immigration to plug the gap instead. Back when the state pension came in, there were 5.5 workers paying tax to support every pensioner. Today, there are only 3.6 workers, meaning it's becoming less and less affordable to support so many retirees. By the middle of this century, that number will be down to 2 workers supporting each pensioner. Justin touched on how the NHS will also need to change. Those aged 85 and over require 7 times more care than those in their 40s and below. And the numbers of Brits in this age group has gone up 700% since 1950. Their proportion of the population has soared by 500% and is projected to quadruple again by the end of this century. The government is already spending more than £124 billion a year on the state pension, more than half its total outlay on benefits. To keep the current ratio of pensioners to workers, experts think the state pension age will have to rise to 71 within the next couple of decades. Demographer Paul Morland explained this effect a little while back to GB News.
Well, when you have a fall in the birth rate, it feeds through. First of all, you have fewer kids at school and you save on your education bill. Then eventually you have fewer people entering the workforce. Where we are now is we have a rather slender workforce and a rather large number of older people, which is wonderful. We all want to live long and healthy lives. But that's only going to get accentuated over time. And what we really need to look at is the ratio of those retired and those in work. And you can move the retirement date, but that's a fairly minor effect. And as you get more and more old people relative to those who are working, pensions go up, healthcare spend goes up, and the tax take comes down. And so you have more and more people, as it were, at the top end of the age spectrum, sitting on a slenderer and slenderer number of workers. And whatever your ideology and whatever your aspirations, unless you're going to say, we'll give up on the health service, we'll give up on pensions, we'll give up on old people and let them fend for themselves. If they've got kids, good luck. If not, too bad. Unless you're really going to step back from what we, even at a most minimal level, would consider a civilized society, you're going to have to ratchet up that tax rate, regardless of what you're doing on defence or anything else. You have to ratchet up that tax rate.
But depending on the nation's finances and longer lifespans, it could be put up further. Or, as Justin Urquhart-Stewart reckons, the entitlement could remain, but the pension you actually receive could be so minimal that you can't rely on it, or, as has been rumoured, it becomes means-tested.
The old rules, where you could actually rely upon a pension when you're 65, 66, 67, 70, have gone. Well, they may still be there, but they're going. If they haven't gone, they will be going soon. And it's very unfair, because you work hard all your life and only when you get to retirement they change the rules. Hang on, why didn't someone tell me this years ago? That is irresponsible behaviour by those politicians of whatever political hue they happen to be. And so we can shout and moan about it, but there's not a great deal in terms of magicking up extra money. If governments, not just in Britain but elsewhere around the world, don't start taking action on this to make sure that those, this ageing population can actually look after itself, maintain itself, then you're going to find social disruption, economic failure, and a pretty miserable time for those people trying to retire. Action can be taken, and it's not does not mean you're all doomed. But if the government does nothing about this and takes the cowardly way out and not deal with it, it's a problem that's going to still lurk there and get worse. If individuals are not going to understand what's going on because no one's told them, and they live in blissful view that I've got a state pension, it's going to be okay, no one dares tell them that it's not okay. And as for the industry itself, I'm afraid they're going to have to grow up and start providing services which are clear, understandable, and good value for those people in the longer term. Not just trying to bet, or even as a significant portion of the population, when I go out and give talks, they think that their future is, it's okay, I do the lottery every week, I'm bound to have a win at some stage. Well, you may do, but it ain't going to be enough.
Justin thinks the all-encompassing welfare state is over. We simply can't afford it. We're going to need to go back to relying on our families to look after us when we're old or sick, he says.
And now we're having to see cuts into parts of the welfare state, which need to be done. But the figures they're talking about at the moment, it's not major surgery. They're talking about actually putting small patches on a wound. I'm afraid they're going to need wholesale changes to the way we deal with this. Radically reforming the NHS so that it's the NHS to provide services, not for every medical requirement, but for emergency issues and but for longer term health issues. Maybe that's not going to be the answer to it. The government will introduce forms of means testing. Why? Because for those who can afford it, you're going to have to pay for it yourself. And to be able to make sure that that is then being fair and people aren't leeching the system for their own benefit. What I find is so frustrating at the moment is, I'm afraid, the politicians and also individuals, they're putting their blinkers on. They don't want to know about it, which is not surprising because it's not a good story. But you can turn it into a positive story if you just say, here is a way of going forward. And this may sound like a pipe dream, but I've already seen it in action, where families band together and you can see actually how the assets and the cash control is managed over the generations. And that gives you that word of confidence. So yes, you should be fearful at the moment because it's being badly run. We're living beyond our means, and the future is not actually having rosy, greater growth coming through. It's a lower, slower world, which is going to be more expensive.
Do you think there will be a state pension in 30 years?
In 30 years' time, there will be a title which says your state pension. It'll still be there. Don't get excited by the value of it because it will end up being pretty small, I suspect. Why? Because the government can't afford it. So they'll never get rid of the title. What they'll do is say, we can only, every person in this country will be entitled to a basic state pension of X, and it won't be something you could live on, it'll be something which will provide a contribution for. What they need to be able to do, and they have to an extent, but again, people didn't understand it, the more you put in, the more benefit you got out. But no one told you actually how much money do you need to have in your pot for your retirement. And when you do tell them that, they get absolutely terrified because you're talking about £500,000 to £1 million. You couldn't even rob a bank for that amount of money. So what you need to do is be able to give people a longer period with greater understanding, and they'll do it. But the terminology and what you're used to today will have changed radically in 30 years' time. Yes, there'll still be a state pension because no politician will say we're getting rid of that. But it'll be a very mean, thin gruel, I'm afraid. If that sounds Dickensian, well, that's your choice. We can either head for that, the soup kitchen, or we can actually make sure we're going to provide a better, may not be a feast, but a survivable amount for us all to be able to deal with. At the same time, helping the weakest in society with a safety net, not a mattress.
Your average person, what age, who's 30, 40 now, what age would you imagine that they will be working till?
Part of it, when you look at the people's careers, you can almost say at the moment they will never retire. And that's probably the best way of looking at it. The good news from the government is probably most people in that situation don't actually understand what's going on and don't realise that in fact there isn't a pension pot for them. They think they're putting money into it, but all they're doing is actually they're just putting money in to pay for yesterday's retirees. But for individuals themselves at the moment, if they really looked at what's going on, they'll consider it to be incredibly unfair. You see the university loans I have to pay. These aren't cheap loans. They're expensive loans. And yet somehow people said, oh, take out a loan and be able to do that. So you start your working life with tens of thousands of debt, expensive debt, and that's hanging around your shoulder. And then someone says, oh, by the way, do you think we can have a flat as well? And I'll start saving for a pension. And you could see why people just turn around and say, I don't understand. I don't want to be part of this. That's a horrid situation to be in. And it doesn't have to be like that at all. It is going to take some brave decisions by politicians to really say, look, the economy is not what it was 20 years ago. It's going to be radically different, but we can make it positively different because of the successes we've already got. Build on those, have further wealth creation. Wealth creation will be in a position where more people are involved in it, and therefore involved, they're paying more tax. And that's the way you get yourself out of that. What you don't want to have is this continual moaning going on that everything is going wrong, and there are lots of things are going wrong. But funny enough, we are the world's 6th largest economy. We still make a lot of stuff. We are still seen as being very entrepreneurial. Support those areas and you'll change people's attitudes. If governments actually focused on more of the successes, not in pipe dream world, but actually show people actually how we have developed areas which are more successful, I think people would change their views.
Justin's greatest sympathy is for the youngest just starting out, who are suffering high taxes to pay for the pensions of today's retirees, but they themselves won't get a pension when the time comes. This money they're paying in tax could have been used for their own investments in their futures. I'm Nick Dunning for GB News.